Morning, everybody.
Well, good morning.
Good morning. Just open up the screen now. Just one last thing. Our shir yesterday was sponsored by Barry and Diane Lichtman, and I neglected to announce this. I just want to bring up the sponsorship information. So Barry and Diane Lichtman sponsored yesterday's Choshen Mishpat shir in memory of Barry's mother's yortzeit, Sarah Bas Baruch Tovia Cohen. May her neshama have an aliyah.
Amen.
Okay.
Thank you,
So
Rabbi.
thank you, Barry. Okay. So we're up to the last sif of Imrei Yaakov, and does everyone see the screen? I'm not sure. I don't see the screen in front of me. Now I see it in front of me. The Rav Shulchan Aruch in the last sif spoke about the added isurim of onoas hager, of oppressing a convert, of saying words that will make him feel hurt. And as we clarified, it's not just regarding reminding him of his convert status, but anytime you make someone feel, you make a ger feel insulted, even because you don't like what he's wearing or whatever, any other reason, or like he makes a bad joke, right? You are immediately making him feel more disenfranchised than other people, and therefore he's much more sensitive. And in the same vein, the last sif is about a person's wife. You have to be very careful when it comes to onoas devarim about your wife and not to cause her pain with your words. Shemitoch shedim asa mitsuya pur anus onaasa mimaher lavo, because her tears are more at the surface, and which means that she's more given to emotional response. Of course, we understand that women stereotypically are more emotionally charged than men, and therefore Hashem will punish more quickly for doing onas devarim against a woman because of that very fact. And as we learned before from the Gemara in Bava Metzia, because all of the gates are closed, are locked, except the gate of tears, right? So when a woman cries out, or a woman just cries, right, she sheds a tear because of something that her husband told her, so that's quite serious. Ula'olam yehi adam zahir bichvod ishto, and a person should be very careful with his wife's honor. She'ein bracha mitsuya beveso shel adam ela bishvil ishto, because blessing is only found in a person's house because of his wife. These are great words to live by, and also something that you can share at the Shabbos table with your significant other tonight. You can let her know, you'll really enjoy something I learned in the shir this morning, and that the only reason why we have bracha in our house is because of you, sweetheart. And she'll be very, very happy that you told her that. And we know that because of the pasuk by Avraham, Ula Avram heitiv ba'avura. It says, and this is quoted by the Gemara. It says that the king of Egypt gave all of these gifts to Avraham because of Sarah, right? But Chazal learned from there that a person always gets blessing in his house because of his wife. The kach amru chachamim livnei doram, and also the sages would regularly say to their fellow, society members, Kivdu es neshoseichem kidei shetis asharim. Honor your wives so that you become wealthy. Honor your wives so that you become wealthy. Okay? Interesting shaila. Thought maybe I would share with you. So for those of you who have a wife who's a convert, you really got to be careful because it's like you're in a no-win situation. So how do you ever have a fight with your wife? If you got to worry about onoas devarim, the answer is you say yes, dear, you're right, and you do whatever you can to maneuver, but it's very, very difficult. Okay, Rav Zilberstein, who's still alive, is a contemporary posek in Eretz Yisrael today, and was asked a lot of questions. And he was asked a question about whether there were a group of nurses in a hospital, and there was a particular doctor who was quite mean to them, making their lives miserable. He would bark orders at them and so forth. And the question is that were they allowed to report him to the administration and get him in trouble? That was the first halachic shaila that he was asked, and because it's at lashon hara and so forth. And his conclusion is that if in any way it is decreasing their ability, diminishing their ability to do their job effectively, then they have every right to report him, right? Okay. Now the second shaila that. And of course, many times, if not most times, it does diminish your ability to do your job well, because when you feel demoralized because you have a coworker or a boss who's constantly barking orders at you and calling you, insulting you and so forth, so it really does demoralize the individual, and it also diminishes their work product ultimately, right? So that was the first tshuva, and then right after that, he asked the following question. Ma'ana isha, ha'im ze chamor kimo ma'ana et ishto. What happens now is verbally hurting a woman in general. Does that have the same status as verbally hurting your wife? Or is this halacha only in regard to a woman, a female who's your wife? Or does it apply to all females? That's the question, and that would really get us in trouble. Okay, so she'ela, od shalu ha'achayot. So the nurses asked me another question. Namar b'maseches bava mitzia. It says in Tractate Bava Mitzia, Amar Rav, la'olam yehe adam zohir ba'onas ishto, shamitoch shadimasa mitzuya onaasa krova. Rav says a person should always be careful in the way that he speaks with his wife, because since her tears are very close to the surface, it's very easy to give her or to offend her, to cause her ona'ah, and you'll be in a lot of trouble with Hashem. V'yeshli histape kaim rofe ze over al ze kivin shuhu mitzar osanu ha'achayos ma'od. And so the question is this doctor who was constantly, haranguing us in the hospital, is he over on additionally on this precept of being careful with the ona'ah of your wife? O shahadvarim amurim rap klapi ishto ki eineha nesuos labayla v'dimasa mitzuya. Or is this only specifically to a person's wife because since she is so dependent upon her husband, she feels even more helpless when her husband insults her? In other words, a woman's feelings are very, very dependent upon her husband's assessment of her, which is not the same if she's not, your wife. If she's not your wife, she may be, by virtue of her gender, may be more prone to crying and sensitivity to hurtful words. But maybe this statement of the sages was only said about a person's wife because in addition to the fact that she's female, she also is emotionally very dependent upon her husband's assessment of her. So tshuva kosav HaMaharal, that the Maharal writes in Nesivos Olam, Shezen Namar Ba'onos Ishto Davka, that it only applies to your wife, this special rule of you have to be very careful about the ona'ah of your wife. Because since the husband has some level of dominion over her, meaning that he has the financial upper hand, and he basically, controls, certainly before the 20th century, it was generally speaking the husband who really had financial control over his wife. And it was therefore a very, very difficult situation for a woman to have any kind of fallout with her husband. Kionas adam acher eno mekabel kol kach hitpa'alut. He says, if it was another person that's not married to the husband, it wouldn't have the hurtful words would not have the same impact because of there's no financial relationship or dependency. Aval ha'isha ba'avur shehi tachat memshelet ha'adam v'im osa lo no'as devarim dim asa mitsuya. He says, but a wife, is under the husband's financial control, and therefore she's even more prone to tears. The gam eved ivri eino mekabel yishpoalus b'teva. And therefore, even though a Hebrew slave, right, is also financially dependent upon his master, but it's not a problem because even though he's financially dependent upon his master, he doesn't have the same emotional makeup as a person's wife. Vafilu ama ivriya ein dimasa mitsuya. And even an Amma Ivriya, which is a Jewish handmaid, a female servant, is not as prone to tears as a man's wife because she has accepted the servitude to be under someone's servitude. He says the most problematic combination is a free woman, who has accepted to be financially dependent on her husband, but realizes that she's not a servant and that she deserves some level of respect. It's specifically a person's wife that is so prone to tears because, on the one hand, she wants to preserve her dignity and to be able to have a say. On the other hand, she realizes that in many ways she's trapped and is subservient to her husband. And that's what's causing her this emotional frustration. And therefore you have to be extra careful. So that's the opinion of the Maharal, that this law that you have to be extra careful with your wife applies specifically to a wife and not to all females. Ulam, HaChafetz Chaim, the Chafetz Chaim seems to disagree. He says, Kasa v'yizoher bazeh afilu li'ishto v'chol shekein le'mishareses. The Chafetz Chaim writes you have to be very careful about ona'ah with your wife, and you have to be even more careful with a housekeeper as far as ona'as devarim. Harei shesover she'ishtu hainu afilu ishta. So it seems from his language that when the Gemara gives the example of being careful how you speak to your wife, it's only an example of a female, meaning even your wife you have to be careful. Like, in other words, you might think, well, I'm so familiar in the way that I speak with my wife, what's the big deal? If I get annoyed with her and I tell her off, she's not going to take it seriously because she knows I love her, right? No, not only a woman who doesn't have that relationship with you, right? But even your wife, you have to be careful. Okay, v'yitochen shedvarav nemru al pi divrei hasma, shekasav lefi shehaisha raka betiva, ve'al tzar ma'at hibocha, and the Sma in his commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, who brings this halacha, says that the reason why you have to be careful with your wife's feelings is because she is very sensitive, and with even the slightest provocational word, she will start to cry. V'Hashem Yisbarach makbid al hadmos, and God is very mindful of tears and the person who causes someone to cry. So it sounds like from that language that any woman There are, so many women that the second they sit down in my office on the couch, the floodgates start to open. They haven't said anything. I haven't said anything, but I know something's coming. So I always keep a big box of tissues on my coffee table when we sit down to speak, because it's very, very common. Um, that's not to say that men are not given to emotion, but with women it's much more prevalent. And this type of statement seems to imply that it applies to all women. So then the question is, so then why in the Gemara, when Rav is quoted as saying that a person has to be careful with the onah of his wife, why not say with the onah of women in general? Ulayesh letaretz al pi divrei mori chami morin hagrish al yashiv shlita shematzinu sheishto shorav haisam mitzarasa biyoser. That it could be because we know that Rav, who made this statement, was married to a shrew. He was married to a woman who made his life miserable. The Gemara in Yevamos says that she would ask him what he wanted for dinner. And if he said lentils, she would make him beans. If he said beans, she would make him lentils. She dafka did things to annoy him. And one day, his son, noticing that his mother did exactly the opposite, or his father, I'm not sure whether it was his mother or his stepmother, but he noticed that she was causing him all of this anguish. So he went to her once, telling her that dad asked for lentils for dinner when he knew that his dad asked for beans. And so when she brought him beans for dinner, he said to his son, "What did you tell mom?" And he admitted that he had told mom the wrong thing. And so he said to his son, "No, that's not right. You have to be honest with your mother." And so, but the story is that he had his wife was a bit of a shrew. They did not have a great relationship. And and what Rav was trying to communicate is that even if your wife is out to annoy you, you still have to be very careful with the way that you speak to her. You may think she's a tough person, and she's always ready to enter the fray with you, and she'll never walk away from a fight, and all of these other things. But no, you have to realize, for a lot of women, they do that. It's a tough exterior, but really they're very, very sensitive. But in truth, these words apply, the halacha applies to any woman. We could still argue that insulting your wife is worse than insulting a regular woman, because a regular woman could shake it off. What we certainly learn from here is that bringing someone to tears is especially egregious kind of onah. So the point really is that it doesn't just apply to females. It applies to children. Children are much more prone to tears. You have to be careful with a lot of different people that are within your purview of relationship, because there are a lot of people who are more sensitive than you are. And so you have to just make sure that everyone is taken care of. All right.
Rabbi, just a quick question about going back a little bit about what we saying about the women bringing blessings into the home. What about in situations where reverse, where you have a very righteous male of the household, and the woman has a lot of flaws in her observance or in her her personality, or all sorts of things that can't even compare to the man. So how does that work in terms of the blessings for the house?
Well, it's a very good question. There are times that a woman does not is not as righteous or as her husband is. That's certainly true. I can't argue with that. That's just the simple fact. Um, I don't know. I mean, obviously, this is the general rule. There are always going to be exceptions. There are times when a woman is not as righteous and she doesn't want to bring guests into the house. She doesn't want to do chesed, and the husband is the one who wants to do all of the good deeds. But generally speaking, the reason why blessing is found in a man's home because of his wife is because the wife occupies the house most of the time. And it's reasonable to assume, therefore, that she's doing mitzvahs within the house. That seems to be the way that Chazal are understanding it, is that since the house is her primary domain and her living space, it stands to reason that the mitzvahs that she does bring blessing into that house. So yeah, so of course there are exceptions, but yeah.
I guess what we're saying, Rabbi, is that women have a greater potential, perhaps. Whether they live up to that potential or not in an individual case depends on the case. But as the Rabbi said,
Right.
based on their sphere of influence, they have a greater potential to play that role. Is that fair?
Correct. Yeah, correct. And by the way, the Menorahs Hamor also says another point, and he says, um, V'zoyer adam be'onas ishto lefi shedim asa mitsuya. He says you have to be very careful with your wife's ona'ah, again because her tears are prevalent. V'daila leisha b'tzar nidus v'tzar leida v'tzar gidul banim. He says a woman has enough pain in her life already, right? What other pains does she have in her life that men don't have? She's menstruates monthly, which is something that men never have to experience. She goes through the pain of childbirth, and she goes through the pain of raising children much more than men do. And so there's a woman already starts with a lot of pain in her life, and that's an additional reason why you have to be careful with not causing her pain. Okay.
Rabbi, what about the point you made talking about children or other women? So one would be in parenting, and second of all, as far as other women in the workplace, like you mentioned, for example, you have a housekeeper, let's say she's doing a terrible job, and even though you speak to her in the nicest terms and criticize her, you obviously are going to bring her pain, but at the same time, you can't just be a shmata and, have horrible employees and never say anything to them.
That's right. So it's all a question of how you say it. There are times when both men and women are given to histrionics and melodramatic behavior, even when you're in a professional setting. I mean, I've certainly experienced that. Sometimes it can be a toxic workspace, because a person, whether male or female, thrives on drama, and you're just trying to get the work done. And then when you tell them, we need to get this done, and they feel that you're criticizing them, they'll break down, not because of any particular reason, right? So obviously, Alan, there are going to be situations where it's unavoidable because the person is being irrationally uh, um, brought to tears. You can't take Look, like we talked about the snowflakes of today. The snowflakes of today will cry at the slightest point of disagreement. Oh, I disagree with you, and their whole world is now shattered because they've been brought up to feel that anything that they say has to be endorsed by everyone, right? In other words, obviously, this halacha has its limitations, but But I think the point is that we have to be mindful of what we say and how we say it as well.
One last thing with
Rabbi?
regards to, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Who would like to speak?
Going back to what Ron said and what the Or said, this business about the women going through the pains. I mean, a husband can be very kind and benevolent and do lots of mitzvahs, but it's really the woman who's mostly impacted. Like, you invite people over for Friday night, she's the one who's cooking the meal and serving the food. Okay, you're helping out, but she takes the brunt. You give a lot of tzedakah, it impacts what she has as her budget to maintain the household. Does that not also factor into it? That she takes the brunt of your
She takes the brunt of your what? Of your criticism?
goodness, your goodness. Whatever you do, you're a big, about mitzvah, about tzedakah. You sit on the board. You're taking time away from her at home. She may need you for in the evening for discussions, whatever. Meantime, you're at the board at the shul or a board of, you're going out to do chesed for somebody else. It's less chesed than you're going to do for her.
Well, I certainly will say that this halacha is a lo sase. Do not cause someone harm, right? What you're advocating is that you have to be even more. You have to go even further than just making sure you avoid insulting her, which is try to be there for her when she needs you, which is a mitzvah sase. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You have to find time for your wife, just like you would want someone to find time for you, to show them proper kavod. And it certainly is a mitzvah to honor your wife, to give kavod to your wife. There's obviously that bein adam lachavero, but here we're really focusing on the make sure you do no harm, right? And yeah.
So, Rabbi, I want to add one other thing a question with regards to a wife, is when you made the comment that the gates are open for tears, that a woman, your wife is all very close to tears, and that the gates are open. So the implication is between a husband and a wife that be careful because you're going to be judged, right away type of thing. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So my question is that with your wife, obviously you want to be, if you're smart, regardless of this halacha, but you want to be as careful with how you speak to her. But nonetheless, it's almost inevitable that you're going to say something that you're going to be insensitive in some way, over the course of your marriage. Like, it's almost impossible to be completely righteous in this way. I'm not advocating that you should say hurtful things to your wife, but it takes time to learn.
Right. It's impossible to avoid 100%.
Yeah.
Correct.
So my question is that if you're going to be judged, by Hashem so immediately, harshly, etc., like, it's almost like, for example, like the wife, let's say you would interview her and you would say, because of your tears, your husband had a car accident, or your husband, fell sick because, his words were hurtful. Now, obviously, I'm distinguishing between a caring husband and a husband who's an abuser. Obviously, that's a different story. But I'm talking about just we'll say, hopefully, your average, nice Jewish husband who's trying his best, but nonetheless is going to be saying things over the course of the marriage unintentionally, hopefully, that's hurtful to his wife, but nonetheless, if he's going to be judged. So I'm trying to, understand that.
Well, the halacha is telling you to be careful. It's not telling you that this is something that you can accomplish. It's inevitable over the course of a marriage. We all cause pain to our spouses. That's just part of the human condition. the halacha is geared to telling you to be sensitive to it. Look, I'll tell you a vort from the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer once wrote, he says, why is it, the Gemara says that if you're very careful with netilas yadayim and are very generous with the water, you'll become a wealthy man. So there was a person who once came to the Chassam Sofer and says, all my life I've been so meticulous in netilas yadayim, and I'm still a bit of a schlepper. Like, why is it that I haven't been successful? And the Chassam Sofer says, like, if you knew what's going on in Shemayim, yes, it's true that you're meticulous in netilas yadayim, but do you know how many things that you do that are meant to bring you poverty? Like, in other words, the fact is that, you speak Lashon Hara, you insult your wife. In other words, there's a balancing act that is going on in Shemayim. And so we may think that we're so deserving of all of these blessings that are waiting for us, and we are. But we have to, what the halacha is trying to bring to our attention is that despite all of the good that we do, we can ruin it for ourselves if we're not careful in the way that we address our wives. All right, this concludes the chapter. We're going to take next week off because it's the week of Sheva Brachas, and I need a little bit more time for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur anyway. So next week there will be no shir. We will resume with the Ezras Hashem a week from Monday. And I wish you all a good Shabbos and all the best.
Mazel tov, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom.
Good Shabbos and Mazel Tov, Rabbi.
Thank
Mazel
you.
Tov, good Shabbos.
Take care now.
Have a good week.